Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Ladies and gentlemen, this series that we're doing today and have done so for the last 6 or 7 months is called Parsha Prose, and my partner in crime, wie man sagt, as they say in Yiddish, is Rabbi Shlomo Gemara. Welcome, Rabbi Gemara.
Good morning, Avrum.
How are you today?
I'm fine, Baruch Hashem. And you know what? I look backwards from the last time we did the podcast until today, and I think that what is happening in the world is just unbelievable.
How so?
I don't think, by the way, that is because of our podcast, but it's still quite amazing. You know, I went into one of our wonderful classes here in chat, and I asked the students, how would they define a miracle? And they got very interesting answers, actually. Because people find it very difficult to believe these days in miracles like the oil that happened in Hanukkah and so on. However, miracle is something that is completely unexpected, something that comes in the right time, and something that normally you would not expect it to happen, not only in terms of time, but like the whole process. And think about what happened in Syria. Just think about the second largest enemy of Israel on the northern border, which create a corridor, by the way, towards Iraq and Iran, just disappeared, vanished to thin air. You know, every pilot in Tzal must know by heart all the batteries of the anti-aircraft batteries in Syria, because this presented a major obstacle to our jets to fly towards other enemies in the area. And over one night, they all gone. There is no effective missiles, anti-air crafts. If this is not a miracle, I don't know what miracle is.
You know, what's phenomenal about this is that it's really irking the supporters of the Palestinians, the Muslims, the Arabs. I've seen many videos on YouTube and otherwise where people are giving up on the Arab fight, on the Muslim fight, the Palestinian fight. George Galloway said he's had enough and he's moving on to other issues. I just watched a young Arab fellow who said, I'm no longer Arab. That's what he said. I'm no longer Arab. He said all of that means is disappointment after disappointment. It's phenomenal what this thing you call Syria, the nace of Syria, has created. Phenomenal.
It's just unbelievable. I think that in few years from now, everyone will learn about it. And you know what? If the Bible would be continue to be written in our time, this will be in the Bible, because the Bible is telling us about, for example, the army of Assyria, not Syria, but Assyria, that, just seized the Shomron, and on the morning, they all were dead. Now, here, not all of them were dead, but they disappeared. It's like, you used to think about like the army of Syria. And by the way, I had certainly not the pleasure to fight against Syrian commando in Lebanon. This is like a very well-trained army. And to think about the fact that today they have no army. Okay, they have other terrorists maybe control the land, but certainly not the Syrian army with all their might.
And there's so much which was coming out of this story. There was revealed yesterday that there was a mass grave that was opened up with 100,000 bodies in it. 100,000 bodies, Rabbi. And the question which is cropping up all over YouTube, obviously from our Jewish brothers and sisters, is where is the protest against this? Where is the voice against the mass torture and killing that...
Avrum, it's very simple. No Jews, no news.
Yeah.
It's that simple. They don't care. The world is a brutal place. Everyone knows it. But when the Jews have to defend themselves, they want us to fight our fight where our hands are behind our back. That's the nature of the world, and I think we have to get used to it. And you know what? What you told me just now, that many of the Arabs themselves start to doubt their own positions, that's the greatest victory of all.
Oh, I agree. I agree totally. Rabbi, my own personal experience with the media vis-a-vis Israel, when we're winning or when we're losing it, in 1994 or 1993, I was working at the United Jewish Appeal, and it was at that time that Scud missiles were coming over from Iraq. And it was a very, very terrifying time. We were called into the UJA offices on Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat, and we were going to launch a campaign in response to this. And the media came in, and many of the journalists at that time, Rabbi, who were there, were crying. They were in tears. They said, well, we're so afraid for your people. We're so afraid for your country. When things started to change, when it started to turn around, when Israel got their their act in order, as they did in Gaza after October 7th, they started to turn on us. But when our hands were tied, a phrase that you used, they were very, very worried and sad. It's a very interesting response.
That's interesting. And I do remember, actually, I was in Israel at the time. I was living in Moshav Nechalim, about 200 meters from our house. Like a huge missile landed in the backyard of one of the members of the Moshav. This was very frightening. And, we had the gas masks on us and the little children. Right. I had at the time like a baby, a year-old, and there was a special construction, kind of a tent, which was completely sealed. Very terrifying, very, very terrifying.
Is that the greatest fear that you ever experienced?
No, actually not. You know what? You get lots of courage, and you cannot show any fear when your children are looking up to you, right? So you try really to be courageous, and to not to think about what might happen. I think the Lebanon war was much more terrifying. Like
fighting in the war itself.
Fighting in the war, like being in ambushing and waiting for the enemy to come. This was much more. And the most frightening, I would say, was, and I think I told about it like 2 weeks ago, when we had to go from Lebanon back to Israel. It was the Hezbollah. It was not Hezbollah at the time, but terrorists started to shoot and to fire RPGs, and until you cross the border, you were terrified. You were terrified because to be terrified means you don't know where it's going to come from. When you know the enemy, when you know that a missile is towards you, even you somehow feel that you control the situation. When you are just like a duck, traveling in an open truck and waiting for something to come, this is really terrifying because you don't know where the enemy is.
Does that fear ever come back to you? Can you remember what that was like?
Not really. Baruch Hashem, not really. I try to put it, behind me, and that's it.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we've told you in the last few weeks in particular, we're really starting to focus on support for the show, more so advertising and sponsorship. Rabbi came up with a great idea last week, and that is to show you visually how you can be supportive of the show. And then the next week, we're actually going to show you a slide as to how you can participate in ensuring that this show continues and is a quality show and that indeed, we can pay for our bills. So stay tuned for that. And there are all kinds of possibilities. I actually started to get a couple of calls, Rabbi, of people who are interested in some form of sponsorship.
That's wonderful.
It's really good news. So if you would like to know more, be in touch with me at avrum.rosensweig at gmail.com, or you can be in touch with the rabbi, and his email is at the bottom of the page. Before we launch into the Parsha of the week, and we do so, we have a discussion through the lens of classic literature. We've been doing this for a number of months now. We always have a schmooze to begin with, and we talk about sometimes critical things or important things or just casual things having to do with the Jewish people, having to do with Israel and ourselves on a personal level. What we've decided to do is sort of take these moments and give them a name. And the name that we have given them is Shivim Panim. So at the top of the show, this will be a particular segment that you can tune into, or if you don't want to, you can tune out of. And you'll be able to pick up on some knowledge from the both of us and some inside information, some fun stuff, some serious stuff. Rabbi, you actually like the phrase Shivim Panim. Where does that come from?
I love it because Shivim Panim means that you can learn the Torah in 70 different ways, and all of them are true. They came from one source, but once it arrived to our world, people can find their own part and their own perspective in the Torah. And I think both of us are different in many, many ways, but it's fun to talk. It's fun to analyze things that are happening in the Jewish world. I enjoy it very much, and I see that our numbers are growing. I guess that more people are enjoying it as well. And we would like, by the way, to hear from them and to hear comment and feedback and suggestion. We are here to listen to our listeners.
Very good. And just to pick up on that thought, if you have ideas that you would like to offer us to tell us or questions on the Parsha, please be in touch with us and let us know. And we'll mention it on the show. We'll talk about your idea or your question. And I think that would create an even broader community than we currently are doing. Now, in terms of Shivim Panim, what I would like to put out to the rabbi this week and to our listeners and viewers is a little bit about how to learn Chumash. And this is an area that I am very, very interested in. I'm always trying to develop my understanding of, let's say, the proper motif or a positive way of learning Torah. So this morning, Rabbi, what I would like to do is to ask you about some of the major interpretations and commentaries on the Chumash and what they bring to us in terms of our understanding of the text. One of them is the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra, who lived from 1089 to 1164. Can you tell us a little bit about him and how he approached the Chumash?
The Ibn Ezra was a very interesting character, and he actually traveled in the world. I think that he even a part of his life lived in London. Unfortunately, I didn't know that you are going to ask me about it, and I did not prepare much. But as far as I remember, he was a few years in London, and his approach to the Torah is based on the Hebrew language. He was phenomenal in understanding the words, the vocabulary, the meaning, the grammar, and therefore many of his perushim, commentaries, are based on understanding well the Hebrew of the Chumash. Once he and usually he will show us the problematic grammar in a certain pasuk, the extra word, the word that does not belong in this order, and so on. And from there, he will move on to shed some light on the entire thing. He's considered one of the more like logical, a reasoning seeking person, and less with spirituality and things like this. And therefore is very loved by the people who are looking at the Torah, at the text, as a book with less divine influence, but more like treat it like a text. He, of course, he doesn't deny the divinely source of the Torah, but he's more focusing on the text and explaining it.
Right. And he also addressed philosophical and scientific issues, sometimes offering interpretations that actually align with Aristotelian philosophy.
Absolutely. He was also a poet, and he was heavily influenced by the Muslim scholars of the day. You have to remember these centuries, like between the 9 and 11, were dominant, not by the Christian scientists, but the Muslim ones, and he was heavily influenced by him, with them, and he tried to understand philosophical issues that they talked about. What is God? What is the concepts involve God? And they influenced in this, especially 2 centuries, they influenced a lot the thinking of our great rabbis. If we talk about Rabbi Saadia Gaon, who always was in touch with Muslim scholars and sometimes agreed and sometimes disagreed, but the need to dig into these issues came actually from the Muslim world.
Maimonides was also very much in sync
Exactly.
with them, right?
Yeah.
Have you studied Muslim philosophy at all, or any of the great writers of that time?
To study the big word. And in order to study it, you need to take some time, which unfortunately I didn't have. But I'm a little bit familiar with the great contribution to, especially as I said, understanding the philosophy of God, the world around us, the connection between God and the world. There are many similarities between the Muslim thinking and the Jewish thinking, to the point that you just mentioned Maimonides. He said that the Muslim belief in God, he said it in Hebrew, emunah she'ein badofi, like it's a belief with no blemish, with no defect. It's like a perfect belief in God. Like we can identify with their principles easily. This is about the philosophy, which I think is important to acknowledge. And some of the Muslim philosophers in the 9th and the 10th and 11th centuries were really geniuses in the way they analyzed the principle of belief.
Rabbi, another interpretation or commentary on the Chumash, excuse me, is Rav Sadia Goyen, who lived from 882 to 942. He was the head of the Jewish community in Sura, Babylonia. Rav Sadia Goyen wrote the first complete Hebrew translation of the Torah and commentaries. He's one of the early figures to emphasize a philosophical approach to understanding the Chumash. What can you tell us about him?
Okay, I will tell you one thing which is very, very interesting. You know, all the Copts, I don't know if you say it in English this way, which are usually now in Africa, Coptic.
Coptic.
Yeah. So they still use, and we are talking about 20 million people, they still use the translation of Rav Saadia Gaon that was written more than 1,000 years ago until this very day. This is considered to be the best translation of the Torah to Arabic, and they still use it.
Fantastic.
Now, what I can say about Rav Saadia Gaon, we need at least 3 podcasts, because if I would combine like, a basketball team of 5 players that influence the Jewish thinking and the Jewish community, maybe from Moshe Rabbeinu until the Gaon Mivilna, he will be like on the, not sitting
front line. He'd be the front line.
He would be one
center.
of the 5 that, start the game.
You know what? Next week, I'd like to touch on this a little bit more, because I think people often are curious about a philosophy of learning. Maybe next week we can talk a little bit about Samson Raphael Hirsch, who had a major influence on Torah learning.
Absolutely.
Okay,
and
Rabbi,
he single-handedly saved the Jewry of Germany from a complete assimilation. No questions about this one.
Right, and we'll talk more about that next week. Rabbi, the what we're discussing this week through Parsha and Prose is the Parsha Shvuah, the portion of the week called Vayeshev. And the book that we're learning it through, if you will, is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher. I want to give an introduction to both of them. And then I want to understand why it is that you chose this book. Parshat Vayeshev, the 9th weekly Torah portion of the book of Genesis, opens a new chapter in the life of the patriarchs Jacob and of his family. As the narrative shifts focus from the great patriarchs Abraham and Isaac to their descendants, we're introduced to the complex dynamics of Jacob's household. The portion begins with Jacob settling in the land of Canaan and features the story of his son Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel, who becomes a central figure in this parsha. Joseph's dream, which foretells his future rise to power, fuels his brothers' jealousy and their hatred, leading them to a plot against him and ultimately enslaving him and selling him so that he ends up in Egypt. This portion delves deeply into the theme of sibling rivalry, betrayal, and the long-lasting consequences of actions driven by envy. At the same time, it sets the stage for the eventual reunification of the family and God's overarching plan for the descendants of Abraham. With its vivid storytelling, emotional depth, and moral lessons, Vayeshev invites reflection on family relationships, the impact of choices, and the lives and the tribulations of people who are imprisoned and who are enslaved. The book that we're discussing this week is Uncle Tom's Cabin, a classic book. It was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it was first published in 1852. It's a powerful and emotionally charged novel that plays a significant role in the shaping of public opinion about slavery in the United States. Set against the backdrop of the pre-Civil War South, the novel follows the life of Uncle Tom, a devout and dignified African-American slave. Through his story and the interconnected fates of other characters, Stowe paints a vivid portrait of the brutal realities of slavery, exposing its dehumanizing effects on both the enslaved and the enslaver. The novel is filled with compelling characters, such as the kind-hearted Elisa, who escapes to freedom, and the cruel and callous Simon Legree, a ruthless plantation owner. Stowe's narrative confronts readers with moral dilemmas and the profound human sufferings caused by the institution of slavery, urging them to reconsider their views and take action against the practice. Uncle Tom's Cabin became a bestseller and had a profound impact on the abolitionist movement, stirring deep emotions and influencing the national debate on slavery in the years leading up to the Civil War. Through its compelling story and vivid characters, the novel remains an important work in American literature and social history. Rabbi, I'll tell you first off, I set about watching the movie, and I couldn't watch it. It was too painful for me to watch. What the slaves in the South went through, and the barbarism and the cruelty that was directed at them. It was too much for me to bear, so I couldn't watch it. But the positive side to it, if you will, is I really started to understand slavery more so, and what it meant for Yosef to be sold into slavery. So tell us, when I asked you to create a chart for the Parshiot, for the portions of the Torah of Bereshit, and the books that we would learn through them, you came up with Uncle Tom's Cabin. Tell us why.
This was, I remember the day actually that my mom came from the library with two books. One was Ohel Adot Tom in Hebrew, which is Uncle Tom's cabin. So in Hebrew, it's more a tent. And the other one was Huckleberry Finn. And my mom said, I think in grade 5 maybe or 6. I want you to read it. And you know what? Like when I read the Ohel Adot Tom, and I guess that like it was already softened a little bit by the translator, I was like horrified. Like, you want me to read it? But it was exactly as you described. It was the first time that I became aware to slavery as a concept. I never thought about it, especially when you are in Israel. You don't think about it. It's not part of your history, right? And I was like, what? How people can be so cruel? What pushed people to be so cruel? And let me tell you one thing about my parents. Keeping the dignity of another human being was paramount in my growing up. Like this was the one rule that my parents set very, very clear. I never got like hit by my parents, but I do remember the only time my father understood that I spoke back to the teacher in irrespectful way. It was, I think, grade 5, and I got a patch. Today, like people are not allowed to use physical means. But I'm so grateful to my father, She'arich Yamim, until 120,
Amen.
for this patch, because was like ingrained in me. You don't disrespect another person. You don't talk down to any person in the world. And reading the story of Uncle Tom, which is basically the story about keeping dignity and integrity in the harshest situations, made a huge impression on me. A huge impression. And this opened my eyes to understand that, this happened only 100 years before I was born. That's the most amazing thing. And something that I was not aware of at all, especially as Israeli. So this was a very important situation for me. And every time, I must say that every time when I read the story about Yosef, this story surface is to understand what slavery really means. Not only the harsh work, but the separation from the family, which is very similar to what Yosef went through. The family behind, the trust in God. This is a major theme in both stories. So there are many similarities. It was an easy choice, actually.
Rabbi, just to veer off for a second on a point that you brought up, did your mother regularly bring home books for you to read?
Quite often. Then I learned to go to the library myself. I was very lucky. My school was about 1 block from the library. And I think from grade 7, I hope no one of my teachers hear me now, I spent more time in the library rather in school. And I think it actually worked well for me. I think I learned more in the library rather than I learned in school. This was just wonderful. And I actually even had an agreement with the librarian that I'm allowed to take 2 books home, not only 1, because this was the minhag in Israel. You can take only 1. And I think that he also ignored the fact that usually the agreement was 2, but I usually took 4 or 6. So it was okay. Everything was fine.
Yeah.
My mother, I think her most influence was seeing her reading and enjoy reading. This was even more important than the books that she offered me. I just knew that reading must be something very enjoyable.
Yeah, the same thing in my family. It's very interesting. I would often watch you when you would come from Mincha Maariv at Mishkan Avrum, the shul in our area, and you would walk in and you would start looking at all the shelves. And then eventually, after a few minutes, you would take a book off the shelf and you would sit down at a table by yourself. You would open it up and you would start to either learn or to read. I wasn't sure. Do you read books from cover to cover today, or do you just learn excerpts?
Depends on the book. You know what? I read much slower than I used to. Unfortunately, I guess it comes with an age where your brain is not fast as it used to be. But important books or important authors, I try to read from cover to cover. Others, just to get the idea of what they have to say, if they have to say something.
What are you reading today?
I just finished to read Harari, This Epicurus. I read a lot about chinuch. That's very important for me. I try to keep in shape, do professional development all the time. So I have here a big library about education. What is the last one that I read? I kept it here somewhere. It's actually about teenagers, a book called Awesome, which is very interesting.
Very good. I started to read Sefer HaChinuch, by the way. or to learn Sefer HaChinuch.
You know, it was written for people in the age of Bar Mitzvah. You know the story of Sefer HaChinuch. It's a very interesting story.
Tell us.
Sefer HaChinuch is like the book of education. He wrote the book because he wanted to create a curriculum for a Bar Mitzvah boy to know the mitzvot in the Torah. So this was written actually as a children's book.
No, really?
Yeah. So he decided to describe the mitzvah, the main laws of every mitzvah in the Torah, and some explanation to it. But I guess that the people 13 years old, let's say 800 years ago, were what we are today in our 60s, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Now, a little bit about giving the context of slavery per our discussion today. Slavery has existed throughout human history, with systems of enslavement in ancient civilization like Egypt, Greece, Rome, and Africa, as well as during transatlantic slave trade. From the 16th to the 19th century, millions of Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas as slaves, primarily to work on plantations in the Caribbean, South America, and North America. Now, there is something called modern-day slavery, and you should know about this. Despite its abolition, slavery continues to exist in various forms today, including forced labor, human trafficking, child labor, and sex slavery. It is estimated that tens of millions of people are currently enslaved worldwide. So let's take that to our Parsha. Yosef's brothers were very angry with him. They hated him, the text says, and they were jealous of him. So what they did was, when he came out to visit them, as they were tending to the sheep, they created a strategy. And it's difficult to say from the text what the strategy was and how it was enacted. But long and short of it was, eventually he was thrown into a pit, and a caravan came by. Again, we're not clear which caravan ultimately took him into Egypt, and he was enslaved. Now, Rabbi, at that time, enslavement was something which was, if you will, very much in vogue. It wasn't surprising that that would be part of getting rid of the brothers' plan to get rid of Yosef. And it was a very treacherous, it was a very terrible, terrible plan, because even within the pit itself, where they threw him, the boar, that says that there were scorpions and all kinds of, crazy things, no water, no food. It really was an awful thing that the brothers did, was it not?
Absolutely. Selling someone to Egypt meant to kill him slowly, not in one shot, but over a few years. If you were a slave in ancient Egypt, like in many other places, if it's the gulags of Siberia, that means that you will be freed only by death. And they knew it very well. They knew it very well. No one could think about the miracle that happened to Yosef. But when they threw him to the pit, when they sold him to the Ishmaelites, that means that they actually killed him. So, as I said, selling someone to slavery in Egypt meant that he's not going to be alive months, weeks, maximum few years after. They were like a bottle of Coca-Cola, used and thrown. And they knew exactly that, like, he has no chance to be alive. And therefore, by the way, you have to understand, therefore, they never suspected the person in the next parshiot in front of them to be Joseph. In their mind, they knew that a year or two, he's dead. And therefore, it never penetrated their mind that maybe, their brother is still alive. This was just impossible.
It's also very interesting when you study the text as to exactly what the process was of he being enslaved. Was it the Midianites who sold him into Egypt? Was it the Ishmael? How does that whole thing work? It's very confusing.
Well, you mentioned the Ibn Ezra, and all the commentaries are very confused because the text is not 100% clear. Who pulled him? Who sold him, actually? Because if you read carefully, it might be the Midianites who sold him to the Ishmaelites. So the Torah left it a little bit unclear what exactly happened. Maybe the Torah actually want to tell us it does not make any difference. The most important thing the Torah wants us to know, that the brother did nothing in order to save Joseph. For them, it was a clear-cut situation. They have to get rid of him. So it was a little bit, it was less bloodier than just killing him directly by leaving him in the pit or to suffocate him or whatever the plan was. But the end result would be the same. But it gives them a better feeling that it's not them killing him, it will be an agent, the Egyptians.
And when you say that at the end of this, it doesn't really matter who sold him. Does it not? Does it really not matter?
We have to know something very, very important of Rome. You know, there are two major sins that are looming over the Jewish people. One is Chet HaEgel, which is a religious sin against God. But there is another one. And this is a selling of Joseph to Egypt, the hatred of brothers to each other. And unfortunately, this sin was never atoned. And on Yom Kippur, the day that is atonement for the sin of the golden calf, we have a very devastating piyut, a part of the davening describing what happened in the Roman time to 10 people, which were the great leaders and the great Torah scholars of the generation. We are talking about the third century, second century. And you know how the story starts in this tefillah. It starts with the emperor want to know and to get an answer why the brothers sold Joseph to Egypt. It troubled him. He wanted an answer from them. Now, I don't know if this story ever happened. I don't think that the emperors learned Torah, but the genius writer of this tefillah want to tell us one thing. Well, Yom Kippur is about like the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf sin. But there is another one. There is another one that caused us so many troubles over the generation. And one of them is the sinat chinam, the hatred that the Jewish people sometimes suffer among ourselves. And you know what? I want to ask you, do you think that this sin does not have any weight today? I would say that, unfortunately, we see it every day. We read about it every day. And until we can redeem ourselves from this hatred for each other, we will suffer. We will suffer exactly like Jacob suffered, like the brothers suffered, like Joseph suffered. When you have a hatred, everyone suffers, period.
Rabbi, in both Vayeshev and Uncle Tom's Cabins, there's a focus on betrayal. How do the acts of betrayal in each story reflect the character's moral choices?
I find this one as a very important question, and I'll tell you why. Because, you know, we are very close to a Chag, which is not ours. Maybe a Jew was involved, but, you know, next week or the week after, there is a celebration of Christianity. And you have to understand, like the Uncle Tom Cabins is a very Christian book.
Yes,
extremely Christian book.
Yes.
And that's maybe make it a good, maybe, you know, we have a new crowd, maybe not only from the Jewish community to speak about it. So both are betrayed, one by his former owner, Mr. Shelby, I believe, and Joseph by his own brothers. And the resilience is just unbelievable in both stories, because both Joseph and Uncle Tom, they have a strong belief in God, which saved them. Because, you know, the one podcast that we are missing is about Viktor Frankl, a man's search for meaning. And this is the entire book is about this one. You can experience harshest experience, the most devastating one, When you have the belief, when you have a light at the end of the tunnel, when you have a meaning to your life, everything changes. It doesn't make it easier, or less harsh. But when you know why you are suffering, or you know that someone is like above you with your suffering, everything changes. And that's what happened to Joseph, and that's what happened to Uncle Tom. But the end of the story is very different, and I think it's very, very important, because Uncle Tom turned to be a martyr, like Jesus himself, right? By us, he's a victory. The Torah is telling us a story about a victory at the end, but we will get to the next parshiot in the coming weeks. So the outcome, the Jewish view and the Christian view depart enormously. Mm-hmm. They start the same, believe in God. But for one, it means to sacrifice himself. For us, it means to live our life in a more meaningful way, more influencing way. And I think this story, actually putting the book against the story of Yosef, giving you a very profound insight to the differences between Judaism and Christianity.
Very good. How does the figure of Joseph in Vayeshev, who experienced hardship and suffering, compare to Uncle Tom's journey in Uncle Tom's cabin?
Well, both of them have to leave their families. And both of them, in the new home, so to speak, start to influence the people around them. And I think this is extremely important insight, that sometimes the slave, the person who is degraded, dehumanized, if there is something within him that is a candle that is lightning, he will shed light to all the people who are the oppressors. And to remind me, a magnificent story that I read in Sharansky's book. Sharansky was many years in the Russian prison. I'm sure that many of our listeners remember the demonstration and the rallies to free him, which actually bear fruits at the end of the day. And he was freed after, I believe, 12 years or so. And his story about his court case, about the judges who judged him, that's exactly what he said. He said to them, you think I'm the one like in prison and you are the free people? It's exactly the opposite. And it left impression. These kind of people enlight everything around them. That happened to Joseph. That happened to Anatoly Natan Sharansky. That happened to Uncle Tom. So slavery by itself does not mean that you have to be dehumanized spiritually. And I think this is a common point to both stories.
But by the way, I once sat on a dais with Sharansky. The book ends by Michael Gilbert. I think he's the little man from Donetsk. So I said to him, so you're the little man from Donetsk. It's very nice to meet you. And I said to him, indeed, did you play chess in your head when you were in the gulag? Because that's what the book says you did. He said, I did. I used to play matches in my head. Phenomenal mind. Phenomenal mind.
Can I tell you a story about Sharansky and myself? Well, Sharansky was hosted by a family here in Toronto. I think he came about 20 years ago, something like this. And he was hosted by Sol Kushitsky. And for Motzei Shabbat, he asked, for fun, if he can arrange a chess match, so he will play against a few people. I actually like to play chess. I'm not that good, but my two children are experts of chess. Actually, both of them were Canadian champions for their age. And this was, by the way, a lot of fun, because I visited all the provinces. We had to go every summer. The way it worked, the championship, the Canadian championship for teenagers, was every year in a different province. That's how I went to Newfoundland, to Nova Scotia, to Manitoba. It was really like a very interesting experience. We were highly disappointed when 1 year it was here in Toronto. But okay, listen. So I got a phone call if I want to come to play chess against Sharansky. Of course, I was very, very excited. And
who would say no to that? Exactly.
I went. There were like another 15 people around the table. Everyone brought his chess, and he started to play. To make actually, it's not a long story. I lost in 17 malachim. How do you say it in 17 moves?
17 moves.
Yeah, actually, one of my friend, Steve Jacobs, he's an excellent chess player. He actually had a draw with Sharansky, which was extremely impressive. All the rest, like he won easily. Yeah, so he's a fantastic chess player.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I love those moments in our lives where we're exposed to something like that, like a brilliant chess master comes to town and you get a chance to play chess with him. You know, I used to do a radio show with my dear friend Marty Gallen, who just passed away. God bless his soul. And we would have singers on our show, stars, like Harry Belafonte and Michael Bublé. One show we had on our show was Jose Feliciano.
Oh, wow.
And I asked him, I said, Jose, can we sing Light My Fire together? He said, absolutely. And we sang the song together on the air, and it's something that I'll never forget.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wonderful moment.
Yeah.
Rabbi, both in Vayeshev and Uncle Tom's Cabin, it highlights the effect of envy and jealousy. How do the characters' emotions in each work to drive the plot and shape their actions?
Well, in the story of Yosef, that's actually was the engine to move the entire story, right? Without the jealousy of the brothers, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. That's when sometimes people here have one intention in mind, but God plays their intention to move His story and not their story. And this is quite an amazing how their hatred and jealousy turned the whole story, and actually everything happened in the opposite way. And you know what? Can I add something that when I read the Parsha this morning, I saw something quite fascinating. Where the whole story is happening. The story is happening in around Shechem, Nablus of today, but Shechem is a Jewish city, which was actually the capital of Shomron. It's located in the center of Shomron, of Samaria. Today it's an Arab city, but it was for many years a city that was populated by all nations that were in Israel, and the Jewish people included, especially when Malchut Israel, the kingship of the kingdom of Israel, this was their center. Now, let me ask you a question. Why they went to Shechem? You know, they just left Hebron and they went to Shechem.
Yes.
Now, everyone who knows the map of Israel, maybe I have one here, knows that it's quite a considerable distance. I think we must connect it to the story that we read last week, the story about the war in Shechem that we discussed last week, the war in Shechem. You know, they were victorious. And I think that the brothers went to Shechem in order to maintain their presence there. They were very, very lucky. Everyone was afraid to fight with them. But this was a major city, and controlling this city or the vicinity of Shechem was a major strategic achievement. And they went there.
Oh, interesting.
That's the way I want to read the story. And they want apparently to take the city to themselves. It's a magnificent place, by the way, also for trade, because it's the center of the land, a fertile area around the city. So they wanted it to themselves, and they could take it because they were victorious in the last war against the people of Shechem. At the end of the story, Shechem was given to whom? To Ephraim and Menashe, the children of Yosef. So their plan was to kill Joseph in the area of Shechem. The end of the story was this land was given to the children of Yosef. So sometimes we have plans. God rolled our plans and our intentions upside down and make it exactly the opposite of what we try to do. Ein Mensch tracht und der Heberstadt lacht. You know, God, a person is planning and Hashem is laughing. And they say that if you want to tell a joke to Hashem, to God, tell him your plans. Because, you know,
I like that.
So that was what is happening. Now, the story of Uncle Tom, I don't think it's so much about jealousy, but it's about disdain, about the way the owners look at their slaves. They saw them only as a property and less than that. You know, the wife Ophelia was her name, I think. The wife of St. Clair. What does she say about slaves? They were born slaves. They will be slaves. They cannot redeem themselves. That's the way they looked at it. So it was not jealousy. Jealousy, you are jealous of someone who is like you. The problem with slavery was they treated the slave like not human being. Me and you have no connection to each other. And this is a sad part of it. More than just the slavery, it's like feeling not human, feeling not worthy. So with slavery comes always the self-perception about yourself as a slave, as a human being. And if you read carefully the Torah, you know, this is very, very interesting. Even when Yosef was a slave, first of all, he was a slave in the richest country in the world. We have to remember that. Like, you can be a slave in Bangladesh and you can be a slave in America. And honestly, there is a difference between the two. I mean, slavery is bad anywhere, but at least here you are exposed to culture, to architecture, to art. Now, where Yosef, you know, the Torah is telling us one detail which is interesting, that the people who went from Gilad to Egypt were a convoy of camels that carried spices and good things to sell in Egypt. Why the Torah is telling us? Who cares if it was whatever?
Good.
So Rashi says that, you know, even on his journey, he smelled like the clothes and good smell, like it was not like something that you know, he would suffer the terrible journey to Egypt. At least God gave him something good to smell, which is a nice perush. But I think on the pshat level, on the very simple level, who is using spices? It's only rich people. And indeed, Joseph ended by the highest echelon of Egypt. And there is a difference between being a slave to the lower echelons of society or the highest one, because that gave him the opportunity to excel and to be noticed. So even in slavery, you have different levels of slavery. And you know, my love to Rome, if you read about the social mobility in Rome, especially the Jewish slave who arrived to Rome and served in the more important families or the richer families in Rome, many of them were free men, and because their intelligence, hardworking, ethics, morality was noticed, and at a certain point they decided that they can be Roman citizens. So even in slavery, Hashem sometimes makes sure that the slavery is not going to be the end of the world. That's what happened to Joseph. Because for many others, I can assure you 100%, they never came back to the family. They never united with their family. They died in the slavery in Egypt. And this was the end of the story.
Rabbi, is there a difference between the hatred of the brothers and the jealousy? Is there a difference between those two emotions? What is the difference?
I think one lead to another. Jealousy is something that we all understand. Sometimes we see other people very successful. We think we could be even better. We are smarter. We are nicer. We are whatever. Hatred is something different. And you know what I think about hatred? Many, many times, both sides can contribute to hatred. We have to remember Yosef, in the beginning, was the person that drew hatred. We cannot ignore his part in the entire story. And indeed, from this Parsha on, what we read in the Torah is a story about a change. The brothers change, Joseph change. And the unity that is created towards Parshat Vayigash is because both parties have changed through the story. And I think this is a very important lesson of the story. We change, we see things differently, we understand our part in the misery that sometimes we bring upon ourselves.
Rabbi, both works explore the themes of escape and freedom. How does the idea of freedom manifest in Vayeshev with Joseph's eventual rise compared to the character's attempt to escape slavery in Uncle Tom's Cabin?
I think in Uncle Tom, slavery is imminent. It's like the tragedy is that you cannot actually escape it. Yes, there is a try to escape it with Elise and her son Harry. And by the way, this is a fame of Canada in the story because they try actually to cross to Canada, which was a haven for people like this, and there are many books about it. But I think the end of Uncle Tom, the end of the girl of the St. Eva, I think was her name, is quite sad. Like they never escaped. He never escaped his slavery. He accepted it. And this is very, very sad. I'll tell you a story. I asked once my doctor if he feels that there is a difference between like a Jewish patient and not Jewish patient coming to ask his advice, and he said, I'll tell you one thing, which is very interesting. And I think when he said it, I understood better the story of Yosef. He said, sometimes when I tell people, listen, this is very bad prognosis. I think that you have few months or a year or two to live. He said, there you see all the difference. He said, in many of the non-Jewish people that he had to deliver them the bad news, they just accept it. And they start to prepare. He said, I never saw like a Jewish patient who did not start to scream, give me a second opinion, send me to another doctor. Do you know any place in the world that will treat it differently? He said the search for life and to overcome these difficulties is like in front of your eyes in most cases. And I think that's the story of Yosef. For most people, once thrown to the jail, once knowing that you are a servant, they will accept it. Like Uncle Tom. The story of Uncle Tom is acceptance. Martyrdom at the end, he died, yes, but it's basically acceptance. And he does not try. I think that in the beginning of the story, if I'm not mistaken, he was offered maybe to run away or something, and he didn't. He accepted his fate as something that was decreed from heaven. By us, of course, we believe that God controlled the world, but we have to do our best in order to redeem ourselves. If it's chas v'chalila illness, if it's chas v'chalila slavery, if it's chas v'chalila exile, that's the story of the Jewish people. We never accept the reality as it is.
Well, that's a lovely Dvar Torah. Thank you for that. I want to diverge a little bit within the Parsha. there's a very compelling story, very strange story about the woman Tamar. And essentially, she is married. Her husband dies, and her father-in-law, Yehuda, says to her, "You know what? You'll marry my other son," and that would go through the speak to the idea of a Levirate marriage. And he dies. So he says, my third son will grow up, and you'll marry him. She didn't want to wait. She wanted to make sure, according to the Chazal, that that her legacy and that her bloodline would be continued, so that ultimately King David would come about, and Mashiach eventually. So she sat by the side of the road, and the idea would meet her father-in-law, and they would cohabite together. Indeed, and that's what happened. And out of that, she had children. It's really strange. It's a very strange story.
Even the location of the story is very strange, because it seems not to serve anything in the story itself, right? It's like a person leave his family, he encounter an affair or a scandal, if you want. And you know what? If the Torah would take out this story, which is very unpleasant and does not leave a great impression about Judah, you would say, okay, the story will be perfect nevertheless, the story of Joseph and his brothers. But I think that upon careful reading, this is maybe the most important story in the entire story, from the beginning of the family of Jacob until they unite. And I'll tell you why. As I said a few minutes ago, the story, like any great story, is a story of change. The people in the story are changing. Let's focus for a second on Yehuda. Number one, he leaves his family. He apparently grasped in a way the terrible consequences of what he did. Instead of bringing Joseph back to his father, he saw his father mourning. No one can console him. The fabric of the family was ripped apart, and he's responsible for it. He is responsible for everything that happened. What is he doing? What everyone sometimes in depression will do. He leaves his family, try to open somewhere like a second chapter in his life, and to remove himself from the family. When people are depressed, they simply cannot go back to where they came from and to face what they did. They cannot deal with the family suffering because of what they did, and he just left. The story of Tamar is causing a change in the personality of Judah. First of all, he tricked his father. He told him a story about Kotonet and that Joseph was eaten by a beast and so on. So now he was tricked. And I'm sure that the moment he realized that he was tricked, he thought about, whoa, I start to get my punishment here. I tricked my father. Now I'm tricked. I'm going to be a subject for all the local newspapers, and the TV channels are going to talk about me and to speak about me. This is very embarrassing. So it's a shock. It's a shock. This is number one. Number two, he could continue to do what he did very well with Joseph. For years, he just covered up the story. He just don't tell his father what happened. He leaves his father to deal with this situation without telling him the truth. And actually, he could continue this way with Tamar. When Tamar comes and says, I'm pregnant from you, he could deny everything. I don't know what the ptilim, what is the chotemet, what are the signs that you send me. He could continue to be the same Judah that he was with his father. And at a certain moment, he decided, I have to stop living with my lies. I'm going to take responsibility for what I did. And I think this is the moment that changed everything. Judah is changing. Judah, that comes from the word in Hebrew of thank you, apam modet Hashem, become to another word in Hebrew, which is hoda'ah, admission, confession. I did something wrong. I take responsibility for it. And you cannot understand the next part of the story without understanding the change that Tamar forced on Judah at this time. She did it in a very subtle way. She did it very gently, but Judah took it to his heart, and from this moment, everything changed. I think we have to acknowledge this story for its contribution to what happened next when Judah takes full responsibility when he has to protect the other brother, Benjamin, in next week's Parsha.
Yes. And when we talk about the Joseph eventually revealing himself to the brothers, there's so much discussion around the tshuva, right, that the brothers went through and the change that Joseph went through. So your point is very, very well taken. Rabbi, just a couple of quotes that I'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers, poignant quotes, both from the Parsha as well as the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, let's start there. This is a very, very powerful quote. The one thing needful is not that we should be told that slavery is wrong, but that we should be made to feel it. And this quote encapsulates the novel's message that the moral wrongness of slavery must be deeply felt by individuals in order to inspire change. A powerful, powerful quote, isn't it?
Very powerful. And you know what? The Torah says something very similar, but not about the slavery. But this is a psychological principle. Sometimes we know what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
But we find it very difficult to bring this knowledge to a real change in our life. And the Torah says the following words, V'hashevota el levavcha ki Adonai hu Elohim. You have to bring it to your heart that God is your God. Now, why is it so important? Because many, many times philosophically we understand that God exists and we have certain emunah and we will declare it. But it has to be V'hashevota el levavecha. You have to return this knowledge to your heart, because your deeds are going to be influenced not by your philosophies, but by your heart. And therefore the Torah says this knowledge must influence your heart, because only then you are going to act like a Jew.
A quote not from the Parsha, but from the Torah itself about slavery. It's found in Exodus 21:2. It says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve for 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go out free for nothing. This verse outlines the law for Hebrew slaves, specifying that they could only serve for 6 years and must be freed in the seventh, a concept known as the sabbatical year. So I bring this forward because a lot of people say, how is it that the Torah allows for slavery? But my answer to them always is it doesn't. In essence, what it allows for is the weaning away from slavery, and this is the way you do it. Would that be accurate?
I have two takes about slavery, which I think are people can understand it better. Number one, in a world that is like lived by democracy and human rights, the whole concept of slavery sounds like, whoa, this is like unacceptable. And it's true. In the system of values that we live in, slavery will be the against everything that we have, no questions about it. But as you mentioned, even today, we have society that their culture and value system is very different. It's very different. Democracy, they never heard about it. They have monarchy or like the elder of the tribe, whatever the case is. There is different in, take India, castes that cannot mingle to each other. So social structure of the West is one, but it's not the social structure in many, many other places in the world. And the Torah is not talking only to the people sitting in Toronto and New York or even Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. The Torah is talking in general to human beings. And slavery was part of the world, is still part of the world. And the Torah says, even if you are in a structure that you have something that is called slavery, you have to remember that this is a human being. And I want to tell you that, in my opinion, if you are looking for evidence that the Torah is true, I would say that this parsha is one of the greatest evidence. Avrum, let's say that I will come to you and say, Avrum, listen, last night, God told me like a whole system of laws. One of them is going to be that every 10 years you have to give your house for charity. No, you are a good guy. You might even accept it. But what do you think most people will tell me?
They'll say, no way.
No way. I don't want even to hear one more word. Now think about the Torah that comes to society that use slaves, and she said, you have to free your slave at a certain point. Most people, if the Torah would not be received from God, will say, go away. I don't want to hear anything from you. The fact that in society that slavery was imminent, was part of life, people accept this law that you have to treat your eved or ama with dignity, was against all the rules. People will say, ma pitom. Exactly as, the people in the Uncle Tom book. It's like it never dawned on them that they have to treat people with dignity. And to free them after a certain amount of years, ma pitom, this was part of their property. And the fact that the Jewish people accepted it shows you that they understood or felt or saw that it came from God himself. Otherwise, they would not accept it.
Rabbi, can you make any correlation between slaves, the outcome of slavery, the experience of slaves, and what the hostages are going through in Gaza right now?
Absolutely. As I said, the main experience of slave is you don't have a family around you. You can be taken. Your life worth nothing. In any certain point, something might happen to you. You are just a piece of property. And here it's also a property. They try to negotiate a deal. They see the hostages as property. That's why they made so many efforts to take so many hostages. And as I say, the dehumanizing of people, that's the worst experience. Like, think about these people who cannot go to school, cannot see their family, cannot celebrate life. What kind of experience? And you know what? I think that when they will come back, this experience, and let's hope that it will happen very, very soon. I really somehow have the feeling that it's going to happen in the next week or 2 weeks. Be'ezrat Hashem, Alevai. But it will take much more time to release themselves from the real slavery, which is the mental one.
Yeah. We don't hear very much from Gilad Shalit, and he got married recently, which is wonderful, wonderful news. And also the disposition of the Israeli, the character of the Israelis, thank God, it's a very strong one. But still, you just know, after going through what he went through, life will never be easy for him. It'll never be easy. But with that, Rabbi, I'd like to make a prayer for the hostages. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless, preserve, and protect the captives and the missing soldiers of the citizens of Israel and the Israel Defense Forces. May God rescue them from captivity and speedily restore them in peace in the merit of the prayers of this holy congregation who pray for them. May the Holy One, blessed be God, show them mercy, increase their strength, remove their pain, and send them a recovery of body and spirit. May God return them to the bosom of their family swiftly and soon. And let us all say amen.
Amen. Amen.
I have an AI poem which I would like to read, and I want to read it because I want to take the edge off this podcast a little bit. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot of pain from this subject matter. Just the simple idea that one person can do what they do to another person by enslaving them, it's so anathema to how we were raised. And it's just, I find it so incredibly painful. How are you feeling right now?
The same thing. Every morning I think there's after the Modéani, I say, well, God, Baruch Hashem, I'm very lucky to wake up in the morning. Please, please give this experience, simple experience, waking up in my home, into my family, give this experience to everyone who now need it so much. Bring redemption to the families who are going, this charada, this fear, what will happen? No person, no human being should be in this situation, and hopefully very soon they will be with us.
So when you make prayers from the tefillot inside the siddur, and you also make prayers in your own head, your own words.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. If I have an opportunity, I speak to God. Sometimes I cannot tell you that I have the right mode at 7:30. It might be at 8:40 after I davened, and I feel the need to say to God, please, please help me here, help the Jewish people here. And I think sometimes it's a better tefillah than just being in shul on time.
There's also a place within Shacharit or within Shmon Esrei, but where you can put in your own words, correct?
Right. In Shomea Tefillah, you can have tefillot. Yeah.
Okay.
Or in Refainu.
Have you got any further comments on the AI poetry?
No.
No.
I don't know if no news are good news or bad news, but one time you have to put a poll. I like the AI poetry. I would give it up, or maybe no, please don't do it next time.
Yeah, so we'll do that.
Poll is always here in school. I do it many times. I take students. I ask them, did you like it? Was it good? Is this program you think it was influential, effective? It's always good to get our listeners to tell us what they think.
But by the way, so not to go on a riff at the end of the show, but whenever you talk about such things, usually by the end, I always have ideas, questions that I have for you. Based on your educational motif, the way you go about teaching your children, are you familiar with Janusz Korczak?
Janusz Korczak was my hero. There is no one book of Janusz Korczak that I didn't read. All of them, by the way, were translated to Hebrew. And this Mr. Goldschmidt, his real name was Goldschmidt.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know, this really fascinated me. As a child, I love kites, and in Israel, it's easy. You go to the beach and you can fly them. Janusz Korczak visited, I think in the year 32 or 33 in Israel, and he recommended the kibbutzim who hosted him to have a yearly competition of kites. I didn't know that. I read it only a few years ago.
I've heard this.
I thought, wow, I always felt connection to this guy. When my wife and myself went to Warsaw, I said, the ghetto, nothing stayed there. I just want to be next to the school of Janusz Korczak, and we went there. Today it's a hospital, but I feel the inspiration. He was an unusually special person.
Next week, when during Shivim Panim, in our new old segment, we'll talk about Samson Raphael Hirsch a little bit, and we'll also talk about Korczak, okay?
Maybe after we finish the Torah cycle, maybe we should talk about Jewish heroes. I think it's interesting. I think it's inspiring. I actually right now write a course about Jewish heroes and how Jewish tradition inspired Jewish heroes. I think it's important.
I'll make notes once we're finished the show. All right, here's the poetry. In Vayeshev, beneath the Canaanite skies, a family's torn with hatred in their eyes. Joseph, beloved by his father's heart, is sold by his brothers, torn apart. A coat of colors, bright as his dreams, becomes a symbol of broken seams. In Egypt's land, his fate unfolds, a tale of suffering yet to be told. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, hearts are bound by chains of hatred all around. A man of faith, of courage true, Uncle Tom's spirit the world knew. Through lashes and pain and torment dire, he rose above, though hearts conspired. Elisa's flight in darkness deep, a mother's love, a promise to keep. Both tales of suffering, of hope and fear, of families torn, yet God is near. In Vayeshev, Yosef's dreams ignite, a path of trials leading to light. In Uncle Tom's world, a voice is raised for freedom, love, and justice praised. Betrayal echoes, hearts are scared, yet faith endures, though paths are hard. For in the struggle, in the pain, there's strength to rise and hope to gain. In Vayeshev and Tom's tale, we see the fight for dignity to be free. Rob, I have to tell you something. Your idea of bringing together the Parsha with classic literature, I'm slowly starting to get why you came up with this idea. Because I learned the Parsha, I learned Torah, and I learned a lot of the pshatim on it. But by learning Uncle Tom, by reviewing Uncle Tom, the story, I really truly have a much better understanding what Yosef went through. So Yeshua to you. I just
Thank you.
Your idea is resonating. It's really resonating.
And again, I think that really reading stories, it's stories, but the stories forces you. The story forces you, every story, to live through the experiences of the person. And as I told you many, many times, I feel that when you teach in yeshiva, you teach more about the intellectual side of it, and it's very, very important.
Yeah.
But it's exactly like a professor going from university, and sometimes, he teaches about economy and he teaches about many principles, but when he go to the real world, he see people suffering, emotional stress, all kind of issues that in the university, from the towers of the academy, you don't see this. And the same experience you have when you learn the Torah. So you know the Perush of Rashi and the Ibn Ezra and others, but you don't feel the story. And when you read about real slavery, you start to understand that selling someone to slavery is like finishing his life completely and doing the worst thing. We didn't speak about it, but our fight against Amalek is because they were a nation of people who kidnap people and sold them to slavery. Maybe when we will talk about the Parsha in Shmot, the Milchemet Amalek, we will explain just that. There is nothing in the world that the Torah hates more than people who can take the life of other people and to make them to slaves. There is nothing that the Torah hates more than that.
No. Yeshua to you, Rabbi. It was a very powerful podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for watching and for listening to the show. And indeed, you can do both. If you think that it's only audio visual, it's also just audio. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, Podbean, on all the social media the major social media outlets. There's a couple of shows that are coming up on my regular podcast that you may want to keep an eye out for. One of them is with Michal Cutler, who is Erwin Cutler's daughter, and she's also Israel's ambassador to the world, really having to do with anti-Semitism. Last week, I interviewed a fellow by the name of Ken Young, who's a native Canadian. He actually went through 2 residential schools himself when he was a youngster, which, by the way, is a form of slavery, I would say. He is the first LLB, the first lawyer who came out of the University of Manitoba, and he was also the chief of the Assembly of Nations in Manitoba itself. They're fascinating human beings, unbelievable people. These are individuals who you can be inspired by in such great ways. And I think it goes without saying that we're part of a very broad world, and that we have to look at not only our own Jewish people, who are so many inspiring Jews within our ranks, but individuals outside of it. And I've been concentrating a lot on the Native community. So take a look for those podcasts. Rabbi, any concluding words?
I'm looking for next week's podcast because the story of Yosef and his brother is the best story ever told. And maybe if you just remind me next week, I will say what Lev Tolstoy said about this amazing story. So I'm just looking forward.
Did you go to the play, Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors?
I did.
Did you
Didn't
like
it
it?
so much.
I didn't like it either. Yeah, I know.
You cannot take this story and to make
No.
it to Hollywood. Like I regret the moment that I agreed to go to it. It's such a.
Do you like live? Do you like live theater in general?
Very much so.
You like
Very
Cats?
much
Did you
so.
go? Did you go to Cats?
No. Not yet. But I think there is something very beautiful about this kind of art that draw your emotions. Like you can cry and you can laugh, and there is something very unique about it.
Did you ever act yourself? Were you ever an actor?
You know what? I think that every teacher, every good teacher, is kind of actor sometimes.
Oh yes, yes.
And I actually wanted to learn a little bit about it. I think it's important, but I didn't do it professionally. Unfortunately, not.
I acted as a tree when I was 5 years old in Robin Hood. I was a tree. Can you see that? You understand that?
Not really. I would give you like a better job.
Yeah, thank you. All right, folks. Once again, thank you for listening and for watching. You have been part of Parsha and Prose. If you'd like to be in touch with us, please do so at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. You can see the rabbi's email at the bottom. We're always looking for sponsorship. We're always looking for advertising. Next week, we are going to show you how you can be part of this show through advertising and sponsorship. Until then, I'm Yisrael Chai, proud to be a Jew, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.